Hey, it's Devin with Canvas and Chamomile, and welcome back for another video. Today we'll be creating this crocheted bee. So to create this little guy, we are going to need some supplies. The first thing we're going to be needing is yarn, of course. Now I'm using yarn in a bunch of different colors, the colors of the rainbow, but use whatever yarn you would like. And now this yarn calls for a 5mm hook, but I am going to be using a 4.5mm hook. I feel like it just works a little bit better. We'll also need a needle and a stitch marker, a pair of scissors, and we'll need some sort of eyes. I like to use felt, but another great option that you're welcome to, of course, use are these little snap-in eyes that I use for some of my smaller plushies. But you will want some sort of eyes, but use whatever ones you would like. If you're using the felt like me, you probably want some sort of glue. I use E6000. And I also use a few extra colors of yarn for some details, so you want that handy as well. And of course you need something to fill up your bee, and I use polyfill. This is the kind that I use. I love it, but use whatever form you would like. So we are going to start by creating a magic ring. I'm gonna do it kind of fast in this video, but if you want a more in-depth tutorial, just let me know and I will create that for you. But we want to create our magic ring, and we are going to put 6 single crochets into that ring. So 1, and we're going to continue all the way to 6. So once you have the 6 stitches, you're going to take that tail from your magic ring and pull it shut. Now we don't want it to be completely shut because it will make it a little bit harder to get into that first stitch. But when you have it mostly shut, you are going to add a single crochet into that first stitch. And then you are going to want to pull the tail completely shut so that your circle is now pretty tight. And of course you want to mark it with your stitch marker. So from here we are going to be placing 2 stitches into each single crochet that we have. So at the end of your row you should have 12 single crochet stitches, and you want to go all the way around the ring. This is what your work should look like when you have that 12 stitches. And we are going to remove our stitch marker and start our next row. So I'm going to place a single crochet into that first stitch and mark it with my stitch marker. And now I'm going to place 2 stitches in every other stitch. So 2 single crochets in every other stitch that we have. So I just placed 2 in that first stitch, and then 1 in the next, and then 2 in the other. And you want to continue this pattern until you have completed the whole row. At the end of your row, you should have 18 stitches. So you can probably start to see a pattern that we are creating where every row we are going to increase our stitches every few stitches, if that makes sense. So I am marking my first stitch right here. I'm going to place a single crochet in the second stitch and 2 single crochets in the third stitch. This row we are increasing every third stitch, and by the end of this row you should have 24 single crochet stitches in your row. Alright, I have made it back to my stitch marker, so I'm going to remove it and place a single crochet in that first stitch, and then mark it with my stitch marker again. This time I'm going to place a single crochet in that second stitch, a single crochet in the third stitch, and 2 single crochets in the fourth stitch. At the end of this row, you should have 30 stitches. Alright, so this is going to be our final row where we are increasing. So again, just like before, I'm going to put a single crochet in the first stitch and mark it with my stitch marker. Now if you've gotten a hold of the pattern, you probably know what I'm going to do next. I'm going to put a single crochet in the second stitch, the third stitch, the fourth stitch, and then in that fifth stitch, we are going to put 2 single crochets. At the end of this row, you should have 36 stitches. So your work should look something like this now, where it's starting to create a larger circle. We are not going to be increasing anymore, so I'm going to put a single stitch in that first stitch, and then I am going to go all the way around our circle and place single crochets in every single stitch. So at the end of this row, you should still have 36 stitches. You want to repeat this row twice so that you should have 2 rows of whatever color you are using with 36 stitches. Now we are about to switch colors, but before we do that, I am going to stitch in the mouth of my bee, and I'm going to be doing that with some black thread, and you're going to want to thread your needle for this part. Now I like to go from the back of my work and try to line it up the best I can with where my stitch marker is. So I'm going to go about 2 rows in and create a line going across my bee like this. And then underneath, I'm going to insert my needle and grab that line of yarn and pull it down like this. And then you can just insert your hook back in that same stitch you were working with, just like that. And then you want to tie it off so that your smile isn't going anywhere. And that's how you create the little mouth. I like to add in all of my bee's facial features while I'm in this beginning stage. So while we're here, I'm also going to add in the eyes. Now, as I said in the beginning, I like to use felt eyes. So these are just felt circles that I cut out. And this is a sticker felt, so it is a little bit sticky, but I find it's not sticky enough to actually stay on my yarn. So I do just use a little dab of glue, and I try to line it up so that it looks in line and proportionate with my mouth, and add both of those eyes in. Now, this is an optional step, but I find it makes my bees so much cuter. I like to add in a little bit of blush, almost like a little cheek underneath the eyes, in some pink, so it looks like your bee has a little bit more character. If you want to do this, what I like to do is, again, take your needle and line it with some pink, and I like to go in a little line, maybe like 2 or 3 stitches over from the eyes and just pull it through just like that. And it gives your bees just slightly more personality. Of course, you want to make sure that you tie the ribbon together because you don't want your blush to come undone after your bee is created. And then you would want to repeat this on both sides of the face. Here's what it would look like with both sides done. Again, the blush is totally optional. I just think it's that much cuter. The next color I'm going to be using is orange. Now we are going to be switching colors, so it takes a little bit of a technique. But you want to remove your stitch marker and begin your single crochet. So I'm inserting my hook, yarn over, and pulling it through like this. So you should have 2 strands on your hook. Next, you want to take your second color and go yarn over and through both of the loops. And then you can pull your first color tight so that that stitch isn't loose, and then continue your single crochets with your new color. And I like to tie the 2 ends together, so again, they don't come undone, but that's just my preference. Now I am done using pink for the whole rest of the project, so I am going to cut that strand of pink, and we will be moving on with orange for the next few rows. I am going to mark that stitch that I did, that first stitch, and then you are going to continue all the way around your bee, placing a single crochet in every single stitch. So at the end of the row you should have 36 stitches, and you are going to repeat this 3 times. So you should have 3 rows of orange by the end. Now you can kind of notice that the stitch marker and where we started the orange does not line up anymore. You can kind of see that here. So I'm going to make sure that I make all of my rows line up. So I'm going to place another single crochet before I switch colors. I'm going to be moving on to yellow next, and just like how we switched colors before, you want to repeat the same process. And we will be continuing on with yellow for the next 3 rows. Just like before, I am going to tie the strands together so that they don't come undone. And you want to add yellow for the next 3 rows. Each row should have 36 stitches. So you can kind of see with every row that passes, our stitch marker gets farther and farther away from where we want our colors to switch. So I am going to add just a few more stitches in so that it lines up with where we change our colors. But remember to still keep your stitch marker in so you know where your row began. The next color I'm going to be using is green. And we are going to switch colors just like before, tie those strands together, and continue with 3 rows of green with 36 stitches in each row. Here's what it will look like with 3 rows of green. Just like before, I'm going to try to match up the lines so that the colors change at the same place. Just add a few more single crochets in, and remember to mark your first stitch. Once again, we will be switching colors. This time I will be using blue. We're going to switch colors the exact same way we've done with all of our other rows. And make sure that you tie those 2 ends together so that they don't come undone while you're crocheting. now you probably already know what I'm going to say, but of course we're going to add 3 rows of blue single crochets, and it'll look something like this when you're done. And make sure you line up those color changes so that it looks like a nice clean finish. And I'm just going to add a few more single crochets so that it lines up. So we will now be moving on to our very last color that we are going to add, and mine is going to be purple. We're going to switch colors the same way you have been, and just like before, we are going to add 3 rows of single crochets with this color. When you reach your stitch marker, it's going to look something like this. But now, because we are using the same color for the rest of our bee, we don't really have to match up the color changes because we're not going to be changing the color anymore. So I am going to place a single crochet in that first stitch and mark it with my stitch marker. And now we are going to start to decrease so we can close off the bee. So in that second stitch, I'm going to place another single crochet, same with the third stitch, the fourth stitch. But in the fifth stitch, we are going to decrease. So if you look closely, I am placing my hook under that first loop of yarn, and then I'm going to repeat the same process with the sixth stitch. So at this point, you should have 3 loops on your hook, and then I'm going to yarn over and pull through the first 2 loops, yarn over and pull through the other 2. And that is your first decrease. So we are going to do this every 5 stitches, so that by the end of this row you should have 30 stitches in your row. Here's another closer look at me decreasing, slipping through the first loop of those 2 stitches, yarn over, pull through the first 2 loops, yarn over, and pull through all the loops. So again, repeat this every 5 stitches until you have 30 stitches in your row. Now I have reached my stitch marker, so I'm going to place a single crochet in that first stitch, mark it with my stitch marker. We're going to continue this pattern. So instead of decreasing every 5 stitches, we are going to decrease every 4 stitches. We are going to continue until you have 24 stitches in your row. So go all the way around and decrease every 4 stitches. So again, you might be sensing the pattern, but I'm going to remove my stitch marker and place a single crochet in that first stitch. This time we are going to decrease every 3 stitches. So 1 crochet, 2 crochet, and then decrease. Just like you can see here, you want to go all the way around, and by the end of this row you should have 18 stitches in your row. Now this is just my preference, but whenever I reach the decreasing every 3 stitches, I like to fill up my bee because the hole is a little bit big enough for me to put polyfill in. And I like to give myself a little bit of slack on my yarn so that my stitches don't get removed. And you want to pack as much polyfill in as you can. And then we are going to continue our decrease to close out our bee. So I'm going to remove my stitch marker, place a single crochet, and this time we are going to be decreasing every other stitch. So you can see I'm placing my single crochet, and then my next stitch will be a decrease. So every other stitch you want to decrease. And don't forget to mark your stitch with your stitch marker, as I almost forgot here, but I quickly remembered, just so you can make sure you know where your row began. At the end of this row, you should have 12 stitches. So this is our last row we will be doing, and we have reached the point where we are going to do a decrease every single stitch. So no gaps between the decreases, we're doing one every single stitch. At the end of this row you should have 6 stitches. Make sure to mark it with your stitch marker so you know where you began, and go all the way around, decreasing every single stitch. By the end it should look something like this, where the hole is pretty closed, and you want to make sure that you cut off most of the length, but you want to leave a little bit of slack for us to stitch up our bee. It'll look something like this. You're going to want your needle next so we can finally close it out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be placing my needle into every stitch like this and pulling it through. And you want to do that with each stitch, placing it in and pulling it through. This just makes sure that the hole is going to be as tight as possible so that no polyfill can get out and your bee looks complete. When you are done stitching it closed, you want to make sure that you pull that tail as tight as you can so that we finally close the bee. And then we want to hide this thread. So I'm just inserting my needle into a random stitch, pulling it through, and then cutting it so that you can't see it anymore. And this is what your bee is going to look like all sewn up. So at this point we have a few extra steps, and that is going to be to add the wings, obviously, because it doesn't really look like a bee right now. So for this, I'm going to be using white yarn, still using that same hook, and we are going to start each wing with a magic circle and place 6 single crochets into that magic circle before closing it out. Once you have those 6 stitches, we are going to start placing half double crochets into each stitch. So you can see here I'm adding a half double crochet to my first stitch and marking it with my stitch marker. So you're going to place 2 half double crochets into each stitch. So by the end, you should have 12 stitches in your ring. When you complete that row, it will look something like this, and we are going to continue with one more row. I'm placing a single half double crochet into my first stitch, marking it with my stitch marker. And into the next stitch, I'm going to add 2 half double crochets. So we are going to increase with every other stitch. So by the time you finish this row, you should have 18 stitches. This is what it will look like when it is done, and you can remove your stitch marker. I'm going to place a single slip stitch into the next stitch just to kind of close out the circle and make it look more uniform. And then you can cut the yarn, but make sure to leave a decent tail and pull through like this. Now you want to repeat this same process twice, so if you need to go back and rewind the video, go ahead and do that. But you want to make sure you have 2 wings. The final step to finish off our bee is to stitch the wings onto our bee. Now I like to make sure that I line it up nicely with the mouth so that the wings don't look lopsided like this, and I'm going to use a second needle just to kind of line up where I want my wings to go, as almost like a marker for where I want them to be. Then I'm going to take my wings and thread them through the top of the bee with that long tail that we created. Pull through like this, and then on the opposite side of the wing I'm going to insert my needle and pull through. I'm going to repeat this process a few times just to make sure that the wing is secure onto the bee. done stitching the wing, you want to make sure you hide the tail. So I'm going to insert my needle at a random stitch and pull through until the tail reaches the other side. And then I'm going to do the same with the second little strand. Now I'm going to stitch on my second wing, just like we did before. It's going to look something like this when you're done, with two little strands hanging out on each side. And I just like to snip them so that they are not exposed outside the bee. And then that is it. You have created your very own rainbow bee. Look how cute they are. I like to add little dots in the eyes to make it look like a little glimmer with some white paint, but it's optional. Let me know if you like this tutorial and what others you would like to see. Thanks so much for watching.